Shabbat Shalom. When I was young, I had the children's book of Greek myths. It wasn't until I was much older that I realized what an oxymoron that was. The children's book of Greek myths that I grew up with had the stories of Hercules and Theseus and Jason and Perseus and all those other usses, and all of their amazing accomplishments. The fight against the Minotaur, the labors of Hercules, they were exciting. It's where I first learned what a Procrustean bed was. It wasn't until I was older that I realized that that was a, shall we say, heavily edited version of Greek mythology. Greek mythology in its fullness does not belong on a child's bookshelf. One of the things that had been severely edited out of my version as a child was the rather constant specter of rape, of sexual attack. This figures as such a repetitive element in Greek mythology, especially when perpetrated by their deities, that one wonders what their society was like. Indeed, when the gods commit these atrocities upon the mortal women, it seems as though this is almost just par for the course, or even a favor. After all, it gives birth to numerous demigods, which are held in such high esteem throughout Greek history. When we turn to Judaism, on the other hand, well, the Torah is not a kid's book either, in the sense that it has not been sanitized, as you would have found as you read through the story of the rape of Dinah and the aftermath to her family and those in the area. It is not an easy thing to read, and it is hard to understand and come to terms with. Which is why if you turn to the commentary, you may be a little off-put. The very first line of this section says that Dinah goes out and she goes to be among the girls of the land. And immediately when you read the classical commentaries, the ones that are most commonly shared, they say, oh, well, what do you expect? What did you expect? You go out? You mean you left the safety of your community? You left the safety of your home? What do you think's going to happen, young lady? And you went and mixed? You went and mixed with the foreigners? The people of Canaan? What did you think was going to happen? How could you be so stupid, Dinah? Didn't you know this is what you were going to get? You were practically inviting this to happen. Indeed, the traditional commentaries, when we first come across them, can be extremely upsetting, and rightfully so. But I'd like to try and put them into context to see that what they are commenting on is not what is often thought of as being an excuse for such attacks in the modern world. Because we live in a society where we will loudly and proudly declare that rape is wrong and continually say that, well, but in sometimes, can you really call it rape if it looks like she was welcoming it at some point? You know, what was she expecting? She went into his apartment. She was dressed this way. All of the excuses we make, which seem to mitigate the blame from the attack, seem to be echoed in this commentary, and I want to make sure that we are not left with a false impression. To understand how the Torah deals with rape, we have to look at three other places. One, we have to look at the actual legislation in the Torah itself, in the book of Devarim and Deuteronomy, which says, if a man rapes a girl, he is guilty. Done. It's very straightforward. Jewish law can be complicated. This one is not so complicated. That if she says it was rape, and there was no way she could have been protected from the assault, it is rape. We take her at her word. Full stop, done. He is now fully responsible for what he has committed as an act of violence against her. Very straightforward. When we look at the two incidents of rape that figure most prominently throughout the rest of Tanakh, and there are not nearly as many as there are in Greek stories, thankfully, we find a couple. One, we find the story of the rape of Gibeah. Gibeah is one of the towns down in the area of Benjamin, And during the days of Judges, a Levite had been traveling there, and while he was there with his lady friend, concubine, a sort of status, lower on the totem pole than a full wife, but still of a solid relationship-ish. They had their own issues. She is attacked and assaulted and brutally raped until she dies. What is the result of this? This attack, which I should point out was taking place within the Jewish community. This was not a case of she had gone out and mixed with others. Indeed, she had stayed in when the assault was beginning upon the house, and she was forced out by her so-called host and husband. What was the result of this attack and this murder? Civil war. It so outraged the entire community of Israel that they went to war against Benjamin, who defended those who had attacked her. Clearly, the nation was not prepared to say, well, what'd she expect? The nation was not prepared to say that those who had attacked her were blameless. This is not to go easy on her husband or the host and everyone else, which the rest of that story we can discuss at another time, because there are still some young people present. They are not blameless either, but she was. And the story makes it very clear that she was. The second most famous story about of an assault of this nature happens in the household of King David. King David did not have a good household. He did not have a peaceful household, and his children, the relationships were toxic. So he had a daughter Tamar, and he had a son Amnon by separate mothers, so they were half brother and sister. And Amnon decided that he wanted to be with his half-sister Tamar. And by want to be, I mean every possible way. This was not something that would be done within a Jewish family. Perhaps if you were an Egyptian royal, you could get away with this, but not within Judaism. So his friend counsels him that all he has to do is pretend to be sick and ask that Tamar bring him something, and that way he can get her alone. Again, she is being tricked into coming to him as an act of kindness. She has done everything right, and yet she is then assaulted. And to add insult to injury, or further injury to injury, once he has been with her, he now despises her and kicks her out and shames her, and nothing is done. Well, nothing is done formally by King David, who does not punish his son for what he has done to his daughter. In fact, it is left to her brother Absalom to eventually avenge himself upon Amnon and to murder him in retaliation, beginning Absalom's climb to challenge his father for the throne. Like I said, this is not a healthy family dynamic. But we can see from both of these cases, as well as the underlying legislation regarding such assaults, that Dinah did nothing wrong. If she had stayed home, do we think that Shem, the man who attacked her, would never have noticed her? Do we think that if she hadn't visited the people of the land at that moment, that Shem never would have assaulted her? It might not have been that day. It might have been 2 weeks from then. It might have been a month from then. But this was a man who was prepared to attack her. And when they came into contact, we should assume that such an attack would have occurred. So what are we being told by the commentary then? The commentary is trying to tell us that the world is dangerous. It is not telling us that Dinah's behavior excuses the behavior of her attacker. It is not telling us that Dinah was a bad person for putting herself in this position. It is warning us that we must realize that there are people like Shem, that there are people like the attackers of Gibeah, there are people like Amnon in the world. And whether you think you are safe at home, whether you think you are safe among your own kind, or whether you think that you are safe in whatever bubble you have created, you are not truly safe until we band together to punish and ensure that such attacks never go undealt with. Those who choose to prey upon other people, whether it be something that is of routine and continual behavior, or whether it be a moment that they choose to do so, must be held accountable. The story of David tells us that the kingdom itself was almost brought down because he failed to bring justice for his daughter. And the story of Gibeah tells us that when justice was also miscarried in that case, it almost brought the entire Jewish people into a destruction that they would never recover from. That we must ensure that there is justice in all such cases. The warnings regarding what happened to Dinah are not there to exonerate her attacker. They are there to simply remind us that we, and especially those who are often more vulnerable in our community, live in a dangerous world, and it is up to us to mitigate that danger. Shabbat Shalom.